numbers.
And we're live.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Delusions of Grandeur. I am one of your hosts, David Streggy, but today we are going to be discussing some very different films tonight, but
Yes.
and I believe that they were audience appreciation April picks because that is our theme. So, Jake, why don't you tell us a little bit about the film that the first film that we are discussing, and who exactly gave us this particular pick?
Yeah. So first off, we'll go ahead and send a thanks to our guest tonight, Roger. His group, Animes and Collections, is tonight's movie choosers, and they have chosen a pair of quite different films from quite different times in the life of the anime in the world of anime. And we'll be starting off with the 1988 classic Studio Ghibli film from Isao Takahata called Hotaru no Haka, or Grave of the Fireflies. This is a film that was released on a double bill with a film that we covered a couple years ago, Hayao Miyazaki's Tonari no Totoro, My Neighbor Totoro. And it's a very unusual pairing in some ways.
Both lovely children's films.
Yeah, very much so. Although more on that as we get into this discussion.
You know, for kids.
Yes, exactly.
In a way, yes, they are.
in a way, yes. And again, we will get into that when I talk about my first impressions, but maybe some of y'all will as well. But Grave of the Fireflies is a very simple film in terms of plot. There's very little. It's essentially a slice of life film about life in wartime. And the IMDb description is a young boy and his little sister struggle to survive in Japan during World War II. That's a slightly simplistic way of putting it, but that's a decent summation. So we will go ahead and start talking about our first impressions. And I'm going to start. Well, why don't we start with Roger? What's your is this your first time with this film, and what is your initial impressions?
Well, this is not my first time with The Grave of the Fireflies. It's been out for a long time, and I remember seeing it on U.S. Manga Corps' release years ago. It's one of those kind of animes that never seem to die. You know, it's just like the certain other ones like Fist of the North Star. It kind of hangs out. Of course, until we talked about it, I've always had considered it to be a film that simply is not for the light of heart. It's not one that you want to show somebody for the first gateway anime, because they're just gonna run away from it.
No,
absolutely.
With one exception, I'll throw out: if someone is a hardcore war movie buff, maybe.
Well, there are a variety of war movies you can definitely talk about, but this thing is just so heavy. It doesn't really. I kind of consider this to be more of an interpersonal kind of film. The struggle and death of two particular children. It's a tragedy from the beginning to the end. There's no happiness found here. So this is something you may want to consider as a part of a couple of films, and maybe you want to show something about something war related. Then you want to show this as something that's at ground level. But definitely, this is something I wouldn't show a newbie.
Good deal. Right. But your overall feeling on it, other than heavy,
I think it's very effective. I think it's a very effective film. It does portray the aspect of war very effectively. And the part of being bombed by the Americans and the result of that, and they lost their homes, their parents, and of course eventually the characters themselves. I don't think it's just one of the few films where I've seen there's no person that kind of kind of lives through it. It becomes physical. Starts from death, goes from a physical stage, and then goes back to death again. So yeah, it's a very effective film. So if you wanted to show what the horrors of war was, this is one of the shows I would show. If the guy really wanted to see something that anime could show you as an art form.
Barefoot Kid.
All right. Good deal. All right. How about you, Chris?
No, it's not the first time I watched it. I used to see it a lot in the 90s on VHS. My brother and I used to watch, we used to watch this back in the 90s. I guess I didn't get around to seeing it for some time, which is kind of surprising as I really enjoyed it and thought it was a masterpiece in a lot of ways. I enjoyed, I don't know, just like a little character study. I enjoyed that sort of melancholy feeling it had. I don't know. I tend to like movies more like this anyway. That kind of delve and invoke those sort of feelings and those strong emotions and make you really feel. Like I don't know. I thought it was excellent, and yeah, I've seen it a lot more so in the past. It's been a while. I kept meaning to get around to rewatching it over the years, and I guess only recently got to rewatch it again. But yeah, well, yeah, I guess and trying to think what else I was going to say. Well, you can move on. I'm sorry, I kind of lost train of track.
Well,
What I
if
was
you
saying
think of
there for a
it,
second.
Yeah.
if you think of anything, speak up. I do have to admit that the phrase "I've seen it a lot" is not one that I often hear talked about with this film. But okay, I believe Dave wanted to wait a little bit before giving his. So, Brandon, I know some of the answers here, but let's hear your thought. Is this your first time?
No, nowhere near it. One could say I've seen it lots myself. One could say, and I've had this opinion from other people before who've said this to me, is there's never been such a good film that I would never want to watch again.
Oh boy!
I have complex feelings with this film. Of course, I saw it at 9 years old when my family took me to Totoro for the first time, and then they backed up. No, just kidding.
Oh man!
But my respect to the late Takahata, an amazing man and an amazing creator, though he may well have disagreed with calling this a war film. As a matter of fact, he actually even said outright, this is not a war movie. It's something very different. In his mind, again, that's his take on it as the one who...
He did clarify it's not an anti-war film. I don't know if he said it. Yeah.
So this film, I saw it first around the time I was in college at the time I saw it, not long after this release came out. And I... at first had my feelings at first were very different than my feelings are now. I looked at it as a very painful movie and a movie that showed the horrors of war from a side that one rarely ever got to see back in the days when I watched it, which was the actual Japanese side of what was going on in World War II. And that really did hit me hard. And of course, I cried my eyes out. Most people did the first time they saw it. But something always bugged me about the film. And so I watched it again, and I watched it again, and I watched it again. And I watched it for about 5 to 6 times that first week. So, never say that if I find a film that I dislike at the end of the day that I've not given it a chance 90% of the time. And then I finally saw a presentation. And I do apologize for the length of this, but it's complex. A YouTube presentation by a guy called Bennett the Sage. He for a show called Anime Abandon. Now, I did not feel like he did his research properly on that video because some of his stuff that he looked up was actually quite wrong. But a lot of the basic points finally hit what was bothering me about the film. So at that time, and this is all between, I think, early 2000s to now, somewhere in the between, I ended up actually finding the material that he had said has never been translated into English, which, by the way, the original source material was translated in 1968 into English. And decided I'd try and read what it was based on. And got to listen to that, different interviews, and came up with a different feeling. So now when I see it, I didn't cry much at all, because I look at it now as less of a war film than now as more of a propaganda film. Maybe not quite unlike Battleship Potemkin or one like that. Masterfully done, but manipulation I can deal with, because most films manipulate. A manipulation in a film like Atonement is very different than manipulation in a film like, say, The Triumph of the Will. And I consider Grave of the Fireflies closer to the latter. Not the same.
It was fighting words.
I do consider it a propaganda tool that much. But I'm not going to go into why I feel that, because then we'll be here all day. And I just wanted to, that's where my feelings are about it now.
That's definitely something worth exploring, though, because that's a very unusual viewpoint given the overall for this one. But anyway, Dave, are you? What's your thought on this one? Is this your first go round?
No, this is probably my second time, and it's still an emotional trip. I mean, I get that the fact that war is the background here, but I as well do not believe that it is necessarily a war film. My take on this was, I know it has a lot to do with disease. So to me, seeing that, I think this was the first time in an anime that I had come across where you could actually see the deterioration of two people go through like a slow impacting disease. You know what I'm saying? And the fact that they were younger children, because he's not quite a teen, but he's not quite an adult. He's like kind of in the middle, so I still consider him a boy. But he definitely has that relationship with his sister, that he's very close, but he's also very overprotective, because in a matter of speaking, I mean, their mother dies and he has to take care of her, so me, I think it's depressing. It really is a depressing film, and it evoked emotions out of me that had I was not quite ready for at my first viewing. But now that I've seen it, I didn't have as strong as a feeling, but it was more or less it more or less still evoked a strong feeling. I mean, it's not one that I will view again as quickly. But it's not that it's not a good film. It's a very good story. It got good characters, and it's got the reality of what might have gone on. And I feel like the director behind it may have actually experienced something similar to me. Like, it's a personal film, like he had actually gone through something similar and wanted to convey it on screen somehow, and it was just painstakingly aware of itself. So, but I was entertained. I was. It's not that that I fell asleep during it, because to me, if you fall asleep, anything's dead interest. So, but it was definitely a very weird film. Aware of what it was evoking out of its audience.
Right. And for my part, this is a film that I may have mentioned this in our discussion on Totoro, or maybe on one of the other discussions, that my real initial introduction to Studio Ghibli, as it was for many people, was going to see Spirited Away. I believe that was the first anime I saw in theaters. I had been aware of Princess Mononoke. That one made the movie news when it came out, but I hadn't seen it. But I absolutely loved Spirited Away and made a point to seek out some Ghibli stuff. And it was within a couple years that I found Grave of the Fireflies. I can't remember when, but it was within a couple years. It was definitely, actually, wait a minute. My senior year, I'm going to go out on a limb. So about a year and a half later, and the reason I'm going to say this is one area where I was shocked to find out just how this film is approached as a, for kids kind of movie. I actually had seen it, and it immediately made a strong impression on me. I was blown away by it. It was emotional. I was astonished. I had never seen anything in animation that came close to this in terms of the feelings that it was going for, the harsh depiction of war, the realistic in many ways depiction of war, and the fallout. It's more about the fallout of war than war itself, which is one of the things that works really well for it. The reason why I can remember is I do believe it was my senior year. I do believe it was the latter half of my senior year that I had a very good friend who was a Japanese exchange student. And I remember commenting to her once about Grave of the Fireflies and how I couldn't believe, because I can't remember what the festival was, but it won a best children's film or something at some major festival. And I'm going to see if I can look that up. But I remember seeing that it had won this major. Oh, yeah. It won Animated Feature and Rights of the Child Award at the Chicago International Children's Film Festival. That's what it was. And I remember remarking to her, what sick bastard would show this to their children? And she's like, oh, I grew up on that movie. She's like, I grew up on that. I watched that as a kid. And yeah, they did have it on a double bill with Totoro, and people were taking their kids to see both films. And that was intentional. They wanted, the one thing to Brandon's point of propaganda that I will give a point to it is that the film was marketed as educational initially, and there was a feeling that you should see it. And Takahata himself, Isao Takahata, has said that Seita is sort of a reflection of the children of the 80s, and not in a good way.
No.
But I will stop it at that. I disagree wholeheartedly that this is a full propaganda piece. I feel more like that's a theme that he was exploring, if that, but at any rate, that colored my initial impression of, wow, maybe I need to look at this again. And one thing that I have always felt about Grave of the Fireflies, everyone talks about how depressing it is, how it's horribly difficult to watch. I've seen it maybe 5 times spaced out over the. I don't think I've ever seen it within 2 years in any given viewing. You know what I mean? Like it's been spaced out. But I have seen it periodically. I've seen the Blu-ray version that Sentai put out, which is much prettier, but I went back to the old Central Park one this time. But one thing about this one that I think a lot of people don't mention, and no one really has mentioned yet, one of the reasons I've always loved it is, to me, it's not a bleak and hopeless film. The fact that you start with Seta saying that I died on and such a date, and you start with spending some time with the Seta and his sister in the spirit realm, you know what's going to happen, and it makes it easier to just sit back and watch the movie. And to my mind, it's more a movie about the bond between two siblings. And it's through the prism of children who see the world with a lot more hopefulness than adults would. And I really think there actually is a lot of hope in the film. So my read on it is very different from, I think, a lot of people's, but more in line, I guess, to the mainstream crowd. And this has been my favorite. This has been my favorite anime film for a long time, but I hesitate to use the word favorite. And one of the reasons why it may be slipping from that title is because I hesitate to use that word favorite. I don't wholeheartedly love it the way that I do Your Name, or even Only Yesterday, which is by this same director. But it's still such a darn good film. So anyway, let's go ahead and there really, again, is not much to the plot. So we can cover that pretty quickly. And I guess if anyone wants to hit specific scenes as we go along, by all means. But the plot can be summed up as two children in the latter days of World War II in Japan lose their mother in a bombing raid and go to live with their distant aunt. Their father is in the Japanese Navy, so he's not there to take care of them right away. They go to live with a distant aunt. Starts off decently enough, but as time goes on, she gets more and more put out by their presence. Yeah, basically, she sees them. She basically sees them as leeches, and in a sense, they kind of are. But one of them's a 4-year-old, so what's a 4-year-old going to do for the war effort? And then after one argument too many, Seta decides that he and his sister Setsuko are going to go live in the bombing shelter that they keep visiting during the air raids. And the rest of the film pretty much is their slow downward slide towards starvation. Honestly, that's the plot. And I know that sounds depressing as hell. But,
yeah, and it is.
And a word on that, real quick, on the source material. The movie is based on a short story by Akiyuki Nosaka, which he won the Naoki Award for Literature. It was double packaged with I think American Hijiki, I think is the name of the other story. And the author wrote the story as a very loosely autobiographical apology to his late sister. He had a younger sister who died of malnutrition, and he blamed himself and he wrote the short story for that. So, Dave, you were talking about how personal this feels.
Yeah.
It's not the director, it was the writer of the short story, although Isao Takahata was alive at the time and had at least vague memories of bombing raids and things like that. So he drew a little bit on his old experience, but the author of the story, it's a very autobiographical piece in a sense. And this is one of the reasons why I so strongly push back against the propaganda angle, because the story is an apology to the late sister. That's its reason for being. Takahata may have different reasons for turning it into an anime, but the story itself, that was its basic origin. And so that's pretty much the plot. And did anyone have anything they want to throw in on that? Any important beats that I overlooked?
A couple of things that I had.
Okay.
As anyone knows, the source material is not the movie in its entirety. And Takahata did make some significant changes, a lot of it to suit where he was going with it. And a lot of this was aimed, as you had said, at the youth, really and truly. Even has even been said in some interviews that he had said that the American reaction, it is what you make of it. Just like you see hope in it, that is your reaction, but that is not necessarily the definitive what it is.
Right.
The definitive what it is art. It can be interpreted, but we are not the intended audience by any means. So how we interpret it is anybody's guess. And of course, Takahata didn't care that we interpret it as an anti-war film, because Americans at large look at it as an anti-war film, because it is. War is hell. This is how terrible things are. This was there. That's how I interpreted it when I first saw it. But the idea being that these children, I mean, and there were a lot of street gangs. There were a lot of things going on at the time with the youth of Japan who had grown up, had not had that experience, and did not understand that you need to come together as the whole. So I think that the whole purpose of it, I didn't think the aunt was necessarily mad at the child. She was mad at Saita because he was not. They were going to the beach. They were having fun. I mean, she could have been taken care of with the minimum needs, and he could have been volunteering. He could have been helping, like the daughter in the household was. But he chose not to.
What was that, Dave?
I was saying the aunt seems to have lived her life as like a field worker or someone who provides for her home by menial labor. And so her side of life, she seems to feel that you must work yourself to the bone every day just to provide for your family. And she saw him, her nephew, as this stuck-up, privileged little child, man-child, so to speak, and he was impotent. I mean, he was so used to having everything done for him, and you could see that he had been used to that kind of a life,
Well, yes and no. I would say
it's a cultural thing.
I would say Saita is not helpless. He does have homemaking skills. He was helping care for his mother. He bends over backwards for his sister. He truly, the only thing is, he is so tunnel focused on her that he doesn't really care too much about the bigger picture. And I think the aunt resents that. I think in her mind, it is an all hands on deck situation just to survive. And I don't think she's evil or cruel or anything. She's bent out of shape by the cruelty of war, basically.
She represents the Japanese culture as a whole. The idea of work for the whole. The level of individuality that we have here is not the same thing as in a Chinese culture is worse about this than Japanese culture, but still, the idea of being an individual, of thinking only of yourself or like one other person, like he's like, it's just me and my sister against the world. That is so against what that idea that they were fighting for. The idea is like, we are better as the whole, that you chip in, that you help out. If he had actually joined the sister and volunteered at such and stuff like that, did some extra work, still had some time with his sister, but not as much, you wouldn't have had the confrontation. And they lay that out pretty plain. When I first saw it, I thought that evil aunt. And it wasn't because I only watched the dub, because out of the, I think it was 15 times I've watched this film. Wow. I have watched it in the sub a good 5 to 6 times out of that. And I watched it, and I said, I've watched this film 5 times straight within a matter of a few days the first times. So, it's not because I haven't seen this film enough. Maybe I've seen it too much. But to me, it's there. And that's the thing. It is guilt, but and one of the things Takahata even said in one of the interviews on the disc is that he was slightly disappointed, but he wasn't entirely disappointed, because he was building the sympathy, but he also wanted to also elicit a reaction of Seta is irresponsible, and he was responsible for his sister's fate, and that they didn't quite get that full reaction. He didn't get the one he wanted entirely.
I honestly gave that reaction a little bit. Seta has always bugged me. And part of the reason why is that he does make a couple of boneheaded decisions. And he does make a couple of, he's a kid and he makes, it's not unrealistic, the things he does. But he does make some unfortunate decisions that carry a lot of weight. And so, there's definitely an element of that he is not presented as perfect and innocent.
He's the stand-in for today's, well, not today's,
the youth of the 80s,
Youth of the 80s.
Yes. Oh, man. Now, if Takahata was making it today, he probably would have been really lazy.
As I said, try not to take any of my points to say that it's not a masterfully crafted film. I just feel like the intent of it is very different than what many people look at, because my belief is this is a very powerful anti-war film that shows how terrible the Japanese had it after World War II, and the struggle between the sister and brother represents how terrible war is and how unavoidable the tragedy is. And that's what I normally get when people talk to me about it.
One could also say how helpless the Japanese were after war, because at that point in time in history, from an American point of view, we hated them. Our country as a whole hated them. Do you think that any of their people were getting any type of help? No, we were putting them in concentration camps after the war. So to me, seeing the disease take the children on of starvation, and what happened to them as a family and as a whole, I can very much see how this type of situation could exist.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
And I actually believe that what Jake has talked about in this, a movie that shows the horrors of war yet has a hopeful end, to me, that explanation is more towards Barefoot Gen, in my opinion, which blatantly shows the horrors of war. That's one that you would have a lot of trouble, at least a part.
I can imagine.
Anyone who's seen it, actually,
Actually,
Roger, you've seen that, right? You've seen Barefoot Gen, right?
No, I have not seen it. I've heard about it, but it's one of those kind of things I looked at and said, "Oh, that's going to be like Grave of the Fireflies. Maybe I should."
yeah.
Yeah.
More hopeful than Grave of the Fireflies, in my opinion. But
Yeah, I remember seeing little snippets and stuff.
I have to give that a go.
but a hard watch, a very hard
Yeah.
watch. Not a slow. It's not a slow burn hard watch like Grave of the Fireflies. It's a oh my god.
Yeah.
That type of watch.
Right.
But
See,
I just want to use that as a comparison piece.
Right. One thing that I do have to agree with, and actually, I don't know if anyone, this collection does have an interesting interview with Roger Ebert. Did anyone watch that?
No.
Oh, he loved the film.
Oh, he did, but he makes some interesting points about the film's visual aesthetic and about the decision to make it as an anime in the first place. Mm-hmm. And he makes some good points about how the visual aesthetic, if you were trying to watch a live action film on this same story, you would probably be so hung up on how horrifying the children look that you wouldn't be able to get anything else out of it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably true. I just watched that short film Hunger Ward last week, and that was hard to watch. And that's a 40-minute film where the actual pictures of emaciated children are just a part of the runtime. It was hard to watch. And I can imagine a film like this. I can't even imagine the live action ones. And actually, Brandon, you're talking about how this one is kind of trying to drive home the point of like the hardworking Japanese versus the indolent youth and whatever. Supposedly, the live action TV movie of this focused on the aunt and focused on how different things were for her in the, which may have been an aesthetic choice to not have to show so many starving kids, but it also might have been it might have actually come off as even more jingoistic in that reading of it than this version did, I would imagine. But I could be wrong. I haven't seen the live action ones. There's a TV movie and an actual movie that are live action, but I have not seen those. Don't know if they'll ever get an American release.
Well, the short story is a tough read, but a good read. Right. I actually believe that if Takahata had done it straight out like that, I wouldn't have the problems I have with the film today. It would have been pretty much. I think I would have remained as my initial reaction to the film, which was, it's a great film. I don't need to ever watch this again.
Now, yeah. I guess we'll get back to the theme, I guess, eventually. But we've already kind of touched on some of the characters. But let's go ahead and do more of a character look at. Of course, the main character is Seita. He's a young man in basically his early mid-teens, I guess. He's like 14-ish. And he is basically the man of the house, has been since his dad went off to war. And like I said, you know, he was taking care of his mother. He shields her death from his sister. He doesn't want his sister to find out. And of course, the aunt apparently is the one that broke the news at some point. And he basically bends over backwards to help her. But as we pointed out, he doesn't extend quite the same courtesy to his aunt, and eventually ends up doing things that make him a traitor in other people's eyes, stealing crops and that sort of thing. So just, I guess if y'all want to throw in any additional points about him as a character, and I think we've already gotten a little bit from Brandon about what he thinks of Seita, but haven't heard as much from Chris and Roger.
Well, you know, what I remember seeing from the film, they were just both surviving in a terrible time. Seita, of course, not being mature enough to have foresight to gather the necessities that they need to survive. They just they just left. I guess they just lived day to day. Just live day to day and see what happened, and eventually, he realized. I guess he kind of wakes up and see his sister emaciated and dying. He takes it to the doctor, and the doctor says she's dying from what's it, starvation?
Yeah,
And
malnutrition.
Well, yeah.
or malnutrition or starvation, and it's just a tragic scene. It just kind of sticks in my mind. He's desperately trying to bring life back to her by making food for her, but she's passing away just as he finishes the meal to be given to her. And it's a hard film for me to watch and talk about. But I do know that Seta, I love him or I hate him or whatever, he was dealing in this particular film, right? That's in the structure of it, in an impossible situation. And what he's going to do? The country's destroyed. The people are just out there and got looters, they got killers, they got crazy people. He has a young sister to take care of. He had a tremendous amount of pressure just to try to get him to live from day to day. So in the end, I think that he does have a redeeming quality of being stoic, and the will to survive, the will to see things through, the will to try to give affection to his remaining family is a very strong point for him.
I think that though I do think the stoicism and pride also pride go before the fall, as they say.
Right.
And I think that the fact that he would not go back to his aunt, that he would not crawl. They even give him a chance later in the movie. Like, son, you need to go back to that aunt and apologize to her. And he's like, no, I'm not going to do it. It's his pride that hurts him and his sister in the end.
That's part of it, definitely.
But that's that whole concept, and an American concept too, right? The idea that we're not expecting to give a handout here. We want you to work for what you get, and if you refuse to work, well, there are some who believe that if you refuse to work, you should just starve to death and die, which is what happened in this case. But that's that idea is like you need to chip in, or you need to actually do work. You need to chip into the help of the country, or you die. And he could have saved the sister, but that's the point. I think that's the point that Takahata made. That's the point, really, that the original author made. He felt guilty because of his pride, because he said, no, I alone can take care of my sister. I don't need to give that responsibility to anybody else, which was the crux of the short story. It was even clearer there. That was because of his pride that she died. At least that's how, and I think that's how the author felt about the real life thing, is that he was too prideful and the pride cost his sisters.
I think from what I understood, it was also an element of he felt like he had been a little too greedy, like he had opportunities.
He had taken her food.
Right. So and actually, and Roger, I want to point out, like, I agree most of what you're saying, but Takahata himself would disagree with one of those comments, that the ability to see it through. I've seen in his interview where he says straight up, Seta has no perseverance. He has no patience. And that was his viewpoint on the character, that he doesn't see things through, that he runs away. Now, I will disagree on that when it comes to his sister. He saw that through as well as he could, but definitely with a lot of things, I think the pride and the lack of patience was part of it. But one thing that I will agree with Takahata on, that I'm surprised, Brandon, you haven't brought up, was apparently one of his biggest criticisms of children of the 80s. And I think this applies to American children of the 80s too. I think this was very much a pandemic, if you will, at the time, was the belief that money fixes everything.
Yeah.
And this kid, he got some money from his mother. And at one point, he gleefully says, we've got enough to live on. We're good. And so he believed because of that. And then he came up against the hard reality that money ain't going to do you any good if you can't get what you need. Like, I think one of the most effective moments in the movie, and I think Roger touched on it, was the scene in the doctor's office where, the doctor's almost bored. He's like, well, she's probably having diarrhea. That's probably causing her malnutrition. So, next patient. And it's like, wait, aren't you going to give her a shot? No, she just needs food. And he just looks at the doctor and he says, where am I going to get food?
Not my business.
Yeah, exactly. But that was a hard reality that he came up against, that he wasn't expecting, that he thought he had the ability to make it through because he had a little bit of money. And because he was resourceful, he was good at cooking and cleaning and all those kind of things. He was able to do the basic stuff that needed to be done. He knew what he needed to buy to cook food. He knew most of what he needed, but he didn't know that you can't buy your way out of everything. And that sometimes, as Brandon said, pride can sometimes, your best intentions, pride gets in the way. And
actually, I wanted to add one thing.
What's up?
Go ahead, Dave. Go ahead.
I was going to say money does eventually run out.
Yes.
Well, actually, and there was another thing about that, a subtlety, and I don't know why I didn't catch it the first few times I watched it, but then when I watched the Anime Abandoned episode, I was drawn back to it. Was they had that scene? I don't know if you remember that scene where they have like the teenage girls. They're talking about how happy they were that the old record player survived.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of that saying, the youth being focused on things, look, our stuff made it through. It becomes about things and not people. And I thought, it's like, and I didn't catch it the first time I had watched it, or even the fifth time I'd watched it. But I admit it was kind of cool seeing that being pointed out. Like I said, and I will say this, the Anime Abandoned episode, if you can check it out, it does have some good points, but it is very flawed factually. So I will warn you on that.
And folks at home, we like to get our facts straight. We don't always do it, but we try. We try. But okay, so the second one, of course, is Setsuko. That's the little girl. She's a little 4-year-old. And what's everyone's thoughts on her as a character, or as a foil to Seita, or whatever?
I would have to say that she has a little bit of innocence about her.
A lot of innocence.
Right.
Actually, I loved how, and I will give the props to the sub, to the Japanese voice casting of this, where he cast an actual young child to play this. Right. And not only that, but the fact that he was able to alter the lines that she said around what she could get out. And I thought he altered the animation around what she said. I thought that was exquisite. The only time I've seen that done as well is, and maybe not really as well animation wise, is in some of the Peanuts specials, especially the original Christmas special. That just I mean, where they used real kids and they utilized that to their advantage. I thought that was an amazing thing.
Yeah, Takahata talked about that in the interview, how it was, he felt standard American practice, but that it was very rare in anime. And I think now it's much more common in anime, but it was very rare at the time. And and apparently the people that put the girl in the, that put her forward as a contender had only taught her a few lines because they didn't think she could remember very many. And apparently her introduction was all Takahata needed. He was like, I want her to be in the role. And it was like, so that was pretty cool. And yes, I agree. It was cool. I think she was 5 and, playing a 4-year-old, which is very rare as well. And I think the kid that played Seita was a young man too. He wasn't old. Like he was more or less age appropriate. which is somewhat unusual as well. But yeah, and Setsuko is one of the reasons why I feel the film has such hope, because up until the very end, she is relatively bright and hopeful. You know she's suffering, but she doesn't wallow in it until she's literally too weak to, you know, really stand. She can be a little bratty at times, but you know, she's 4. There's a couple of parts where she gets a little annoying for that reason, but yeah, I mean, what do the rest of y'all think on that?
Well, it's. I really don't have much of an opinion about the young child. To me, she was the representation of, you know, I just don't have much thought of this film other than being kind of a helpless situation.
Okay.
She was the anchor that the young kid had to give his force and life to. He had to cater his life around her. Yeah, he had fixated on her. Uh, you know, I guess I just have a different impression because ironically, this was the first Ghibli film I've ever had seen. And I said, "Oh, look at this! This has all these awards on it." So that's the reason why I watched it, and I definitely regretted it. So there was a case of myself watching it once and said never again. so, so
Good
yeah,
times.
yeah. Well, it's one of
I
those
hope it
things.
didn't scare you off of the others.
No, no, it didn't. But this in the case, I didn't think that anime could give you this kind of a storyline. So
Right.
you know, when I was watching it, I was depressed. I just definitely depressed in it. You know, I guess again I have a different take. I didn't see much hope in this film. It just was I guess a representation of what people will have to do in a time of war and not having anything, and then going from day to day, and then eventually, well, you know, passing away. So yeah,
All
pretty
right.
depressing. Yeah, but that was my impression of it.
All right. Anyone? We talked a little bit on the aunt. Did anyone have anything else they want to throw out on her as far as character discussion?
I did want to say something to the effect that her brother really did a lot to try to make sure that, you know, whatever was going on with her as the disease went on, her sensibility and her world didn't change all that much around her while he was provided her that home in that hovel, you know, that they found. So to me, I liked the fact that you know, he was trying to make it seem like everything was still okay.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think the aunt has been covered also. I mean,
Okay.
I think to many people, she is a villain, which is not I don't think that was how Takahata viewed it. And I don't think that's how the original author viewed it either. But many of us who watch it the first time was like, that mean woman. Children shouldn't have to do anything. He's taking care of his sister. That's all that he needs to do. But that's not how it's meant to be looked at. If you're looking at it from that cultural lens, to try and look at it from the cultural lens of the time, you can understand that she wasn't necessarily being mean. She was trying to try and get him to understand. Look at this example. You've got somebody right there. I mean, you don't see much of the daughter because she's helping out here or there.
Right.
She's going back to school. He's dropped out of school because the school is bummed, but he's not trying to, you know, go to the other school. He's not trying to help out.
Right.
I really do think that the aunt is more of she's trying to protect her family. I think she would have gladly taken the little girl in and not given much problem. She knows that a 5-year-old can't work like that. But her disdain was more for him and doing that. And I do think that she is miscast as the villain a lot of times by people who don't look at this in the right way.
You could, if you're looking at it more of, I guess the way I'm guessing that you're getting at, or certainly I kind of see it this way based on what I know of Takahata's views of this. She's almost more of like a challenge that he should rise to meet.
Yeah.
That, and it is worth noting as well. We mentioned the daughter, but I don't know if we've mentioned that she also has a boarder. And so that's another thing that she's doing to try to get by, try to survive, try to make ends meet for her family. And she thinks nothing of giving the boarder plenty of good food, but he's no doubt paying rent and he is supporting the war effort. And those are both, good things there. And I do. And like you said, you don't see much of the daughter or the boarder for that matter. So you don't really get much of a feel for them as characters. Really, there's very few other characters that you really get to see much of or learn much of. Even the mother dies so early on that you can't really, do much with her. But I do want to give a shout out to that one prefectural cop where he gets Seita gets caught stealing from that guy's field at night, and he beats the crap out of him and drags him into the policeman, and the cop just looks at him. He's like, "I'll take it from here," and he's like, "Yeah, but," and he's like, this looks an awful lot like assault. And the guy's like, "Okay, I'm leaving." To me, that was actually a little bit of a comic relief moment, but it was also a good, just a good kind of opening it up the window to some other people on different sides of I guess you could say different sides of the conflict or what have you. It was kind of nice having that little moment in the film, to me anyway. But
I needed some levity in this film. You didn't have much.
Yeah. You get a little bit. And again, you get some from Setsuko because she's just naive and young and she still sees the world hopefully. And so you do get a little bit of levity with them, but it's not as much as some people would like. But I have said before, and I know Brandon and I have had this debate of like, what makes a more depressing film? I do not find this film as depressing as I do, for example, 5 centimeters per second. But that's because the particular things of that film that hit a nerve, I guess, hit a little bit closer to home for me. So I find that one depressing compared to this one. But I know some people would be like, Oh,
I find it, I don't find it, I understand where it can be depressing, but I do find it actually, I actually find that one oddly hopeful in many cases. But again, by this one, I could easily say that it's one that you can watch again and again, and you can learn a little each time. This one is one I have a hard time. Yet I forced myself to do it. Much like many of the films that I have a hard time with in my collection, I force myself to watch them, see if there's something that can change. And it did flick a switch in my mind, but in a different direction than I thought it would be. And now the film does not trigger sadness as much as it does trigger a little bit of my own like prideful anger, I guess you could say.
The righteous indignation.
So yeah, I mean that is what it is. But,
anyone else have any thoughts on characters?
Not that I know of.
There you go. All right. Chris.
Oh, well,
You there?
I was just gonna say, I guess, yeah. Can you hear me? I don't know
Yeah. Oh,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, I hear you.
am I coming through or?
Oh
Yep.
yeah.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, I was just gonna say, I guess the way I kind of interpreted the whole thing with the brother and the sister was, I guess, kind of how the theme of like impermanence and how he was progressed through the movie. He started to realize that basically all life and all love is lost and everything falls down and breaks up. You know, that sort of theme, like Dave was saying, with disease and
Mm-hmm.
decay and I just thought the whole like impermanence theme, that, although all we care about, all the things in life eventually change or they end or I don't know. I just thought that was a layer to it that was interesting as far as the progression of the character, especially the lead character and with his sister
Mm-hmm.
and then even seeing how she was more innocent and then yet all these things were happening just the same as somebody wasn't innocent, her
Mm-hmm.
and then her obviously passing away. I don't know. I thought that was an interesting layer to it. I mean, I took it kind of more
Mm-hmm.
as a character study of those, like the two characters. It kind of reminded me of, I don't know if you've ever seen, well, they're these two favorite animated films of mine. Like certain aspects from me, A Watership Down and The Plague Dogs. I
Oh
don't know
my
if you
Oh
God.
guys ever
God.
seen any of those two movies.
Oh my God, that's
Very
something to
happy
see.
films.
Yeah.
Have you
Sadly,
seen?
have not seen those. I have Watership Down. I need to
Yeah.
watch it.
I watched that. I watched Watership Down as a kid, and I was like, "Oh
Yeah,
my God,
they're
is this what's? This is not a cartoon. No, normal. You know, these
What was
nice
that?
little bunny rabbits that have such a timely death by
yeah. I mean,
moment,
Right,
and the
those
lead
two
rabbit
films
being
were like
meaner.
favorites of mine since I was a kid. But there's a similarity.
right.
There's like there are a lot of similar themes. It's like where they take a journey and then they discover, they lose their innocence and they
Mm-hmm.
discover things aren't the way that they hoped they would be, thought
Mm-hmm.
they would be. I mean, yeah, they're not happy films, but
Well,
Right.
this film kind of had a lot of parallels with those two films, I thought.
Hmm.
Uh, or
I
where the
mean, like
wind
Plague
blows. If you
Dogs
when
is
the wind
a
blows.
film where dogs escape an experimental lab and are being pursued, and then they might have the Black Plague. What's that?
Hmm.
I
oh,
was
about
thinking,
the two dogs.
What was that? I'm
yeah.
sorry, I didn't.
It's something about two dogs, right? They had both been
Oh,
experimented
okay.
on,
I'm
and
sorry. I
they
thought somebody
carry
was
a
talking.
dangerous disease.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Plague Dogs movie,
yeah. The Plague Dog
Oh,
movie.
and they
yeah.
escape.
S- Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Black
I think.
Plague, or well, they never say. They never fold the movie. Yeah,
Hmm.
this movie kind of had the similar random
Oh,
ways. They had lots of themes, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know
I don't
why,
know. I
but I
was
also
just
think of
saying
where the
that was
wind.
an interesting, I guess, aspect to the movie or layer to the movie. I guess I don't know. I
Right.
kind of lost my point. I think in the whole way.
Sorry.
yeah.
I was thinking also like when the wind blows as well.
Huh.
Okay.
1986 film, a
I'm
similar
Hmm.
sorry,
concept.
we broke up.
Yeah.
When the wind blows, if you're familiar with that
Something
one.
with about the something
I'm
about a
not.
toad
Oh,
and
okay. Yeah,
I remember
Isn't that
vague.
like the? Isn't that like the wind in the willows or something?
No, no, you're thinking Wind in the Willows. When the Wind Blows is about a
Ah.
British couple that survive the onslaught of a nuclear war initially,
Ah.
Yeah,
as
yeah. I
they
think that's.
slowly face mortality and the end of life, which is
Oh.
another toy movie,
Lovely.
movie that
Oh
everybody
yeah.
loves to see.
Yeah. Of course, for me, Brandon's mentioned a few times Barefoot Again. The other World War II anime that I have seen, of course, much more recent film, In This Corner of the World, and that is just a
Yeah.
phenomenal film. The recut version of which apparently is the longest anime yet produced, But the original version was shorter than our next film, Haruhi. But In This Corner of the World was excellent. It had a couple of pretty graphic scenes in it, but for the most part, it was not as bleak as this one for the most part, and it was interesting. But that brings up, I guess it's probably time to shift gears a little bit. This is a film where theme is a big part, and we've touched on it a lot. But one thing I want to mention, a couple weeks back, we did our Tom Hanks night, where one of the films that we covered was Saving Private Ryan.
Oh, okay.
And I made the point in that one that one of the great things about the opening sequence in Saving Private Ryan is that you're following one group of people. They're not trying to catch the entire battle on screen. They're following one group of people. And that, for me, makes a much more effective war movie. But when you get even more tunnel focused than that, a film that I saw around the same time as this that had the theme of being very few people involved. I don't know if any of y'all have seen. There's a Bosnian Herzegovinian film that I believe won the Oscar for foreign language film called No Man's Land. And the entire film takes place in No Man's Land between the two lines, where you have a Bosnian, a Serb, and a dude on a landmine.
Yep.
And that's the entire cast pretty much. There's other people involved, but it focuses on those people in that impossible situation. Like if the one guy can't move or they all die, but there's also other things causing, it's no man's land. So if anyone breaks ranks, they're going to get killed by the opposing side. It's a very difficult film, but it's also one that focuses on just a few people in an impossible wartime situation. And so I kind of think of that one sometimes when I think of this. But I probably will get a little flack from this from some people, but I've always considered Grave of the Fireflies the counterpoint to Schindler's List, because you've got this huge, sprawling epic about the Western theater of operations versus this tiny, intimate drama about the Eastern theater. And to me, they're like the two best World War II films. The Pianist is kind of in there too. Whatever you say about Polanski, he made a damn fine film with that one. But at any rate, but that was a very intimate drama about just a few characters. Life is Beautiful was very focused on just a few characters. I'm kind of curious what y'all think about that. Is that improve the war film experience, or do y'all disagree with that?
I wanted to make the point that I do not feel, again, I don't consider it a war film, because I think you could have done a good example, A Spirit in the Sun, a good example of that, which is a disaster movie where a couple of disaster films, the second film kind of goes over, kind of jumps the shark, but the first film is about
sharks in it?
Amazing, like this magnitude earthquake happens and Mount Fuji erupts and Japan is split in two. And you could have easily, World War II was just one possible setting, but this particular movie could have taken place in any tragedy and had the same impact. I maybe not on American audiences, because again, American audiences associated a heck of a lot more with the war than other audiences. But I think that this one could have occurred in Saving Private Ryan. Yeah, it's a little bit harder to do, and in This Corner of the World, especially, it would be a lot harder to have any other way. That one is tied pretty well intrinsically,
right?
So I do understand the concept of it not necessarily being a war film, but a film about loss and grief on the positive end, and about cultural unity and the need to stamp out individualism in the less nice view.
And understand, I'm using war film in the broad sense, kind of like, let's take an example of like the idea of looking at Jaws as a horror film, for example. I know technically it is, but I never really thought of it that way, and so there are a lot of films like that like they have that label, and I'm using war film broadly, but it could be a survival film, or you could just look at it straight up as a family, like a film of family. Yes, a family film. I almost said that in the wrong way. But, for kids. Although, like we said, a lot of kids did grow up on this one. It was their version of Watership Down, I guess.
Yeah.
but in the and actually in the broader sense of a survival film, I wonder how many here have seen the anime series Tokyo Magnitude 8.0.
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah,
sure.
So that has some similarities where you have a couple siblings working their way through the rubble of a disaster, and yeah, that was an interesting one.
Yeah, but in that case, you have an adult that's taking care of them.
Right.
They have an adult guide.
I mean, imagine though, like if they had been in the household at the time, and he had asked him to do chores for the household, and he said, "Screw you! I'm just taking care of my sibling," and then end up splitting. Then it would be then it could still have ended up the same way.
See, when I think of war films, I think of The Longest Day, or the 12, the Dirty Dozen.
Yeah.
Or the bridge at Remagen, or the bridge on the River Kwai. That's
a good one.
Yes. These are war films. Some of them have different aspects, but to me, those are like what I would call war films. This has the backdrop of war,
right?
Where it's not focused on the war; it's more focused on the struggle after the fact,
right?
So to me, it's not a full-on war film, and it's about the struggle that that happened after, and how much struggle it was.
Actually, I guess in the way that you're putting that up there, you could almost look at it as a post-apocalyptic film.
I would call it a pandemic film. Almost.
Yeah.
It could be considered.
Yeah.
Pandemic of
starvation.
Starvation.
Talking about 13 Monkeys or something like that instead.
12
monkeys.
Yes.
I see what you did there.
Yeah. We need to do 12 Monkeys one day.
You Ocean 12 the bastard for a moment.
Right.
You need to do 12 Monkeys back to back with Monty Python and the Holy Grail so you can contrast them.
But yeah, it was more or less.
Then again,
and the Holy Grease Monkeys.
Okay, well, if we're talking Terry Gilliam, he has gone just as bleak as this film. And I mean, Tideland, holy crap!
What about Time Bandits? What about Time Bandits?
That's an odd one.
Yeah,
it's an interesting mix.
So don't touch it. It's evil. And then they see the parents blow up.
Right. So, and we gotta mention with this film, of course, one thing that definitely needs to be mentioned are the production aspects of the film. Takahata claims that he basically got the assignment and put the film out in about a year, which is phenomenal for an animated film. I mean, that's like, now, of course, we'll get a little bit more into how he may have made that happen, but suffice it to say, Isao Takahata was known to be a taskmaster, and not
necessarily in a good way.
Not necessarily in a good way. Yoshifumi Kondo, the wonderful talent who did Whisper of the Heart, was the animation director on this film and I think 3 other Takahata films. I think he was on Only Yesterday and Pompoko. And he got to do Whisper of the Heart. And 2 years later, he passed away in his 40s. And Toshio Suzuki, the co-founder of Ghibli, in the last couple of years hinted that Takahata was part of the reason for that. So the man, unfortunately, literally drove people too hard. He drove them too hard. So I could see how the film was made so quickly. But that having been said, it's got a wonderful visual aesthetic. They use brown lines instead of black, which gave it kind of a more muted, naturalistic look. There's a lot of sepia tones in the lighting. And then the spirit realm scenes are done in this warm red. Almost reminds me of, and it wouldn't surprise me if it heavily influenced Guillermo del Toro. I feel like those scenes have sort of a Del Toro vibe to them now that I go back and watch it. And I'm just kind of curious what the rest of y'all think on the overall animation and on the difference that they of what they did for this for the spirit world scenes.
I do think that the coloring of the animation itself is very bleak and very beautiful at the same time. To me, it definitely enhances the grief, enhances the mood of the piece. To me throughout, and it's dark where it's dark, and it's light when it's light. So to me, it definitely accentuates the mood of the film and puts the audience where it wants it to go. So
right.
I actually agree fully with Dave on that one. I really thought that it really did express the meaning. It is a masterfully put together film. It does a lot to try and get it to where it was. In a way, I'm almost disappointed that he didn't quite get the entire response he was looking for because of how much of a well done piece it was. But of course, then again, his way of living could be also an expression as to why maybe his point was good not to have been reached.
Right. What about the other guys? What do y'all think?
Yeah, I agreed with the whole the colors and what Dave was saying. I also thought there's a lot of interesting, I guess you could say the shot compositions because of the animation,
Right.
just the way they compose stuff within the frame. I really liked one. There were several I was trying to think of, but one I'm thinking of now is where he walks up and it's a kind of a long shot where he walks up and he's kind of off the side of the frame, and then his sister and the aunt are over there, and he has to go over there to tell her the news about the mother, and just how they kind of the way they framed it and the way they had it the shot did long, and it kind of built that sort of feeling of anticipation of he's thinking how am I going to tell my sister that the mother's dying, and it's just the way they framed it, and the way they the shot
not coming back
for several moments. Yeah.
Right.
Was one scene. There's some other. I wish I could think. I was thinking of them earlier. There's other shots like that I really liked, and I wish I could recall at the moment specifically. There were some other parts, but I mean, I remember that one offhand. I'll try to see if I can think of the rest. I'll probably think of them when I'm later, but yeah.
Well, let me think of it. Roger, do you have anything you wanted to throw out there?
Not too much. And I just but what I can remember of Grave the Fireflies, it looks like a Ghibli film. So you're gonna have artistically well done backgrounds with simplistic character designs in the front. So I see the same thing going from to just about all their films. Maybe other than Nausicaa, maybe Nausicaa. But it does have an impact because it kind of it makes people focus on the characters, on their plight. The background is simply, I guess, I guess it's a way of giving the art of the animators some relief. Because they're so focused on these characters, they got to do something else. Maybe doodle something. So the director makes them say, "Yeah, make the trash can into something that's so 3D that you'll just have to look at it." so, so that's what I get my impression from this film as compared to other Ghibli films.
I could be wrong about the actual level that they're involved in, but I know both Takahata and Miyazaki are involved in the backgrounds of their films, and that they definitely have a lot to do with the shot composition of the background. I don't remember how much of that is their actual artwork or not, but for one thing that was interesting in Ebert's description was he credited anime versus American animation for the depth of detail in the background, and he was talking about how this film and other ones like it have such painterly backgrounds, and he was and that was one of the things he absolutely loved about it. And I mostly agree. I think most Ghibli films, the backgrounds are gorgeous. I mean, almost without exception. And the main exceptions actually tend to be the works of Isao Takahata, particularly My Neighbors the Yamadas, and that one was a very unusual art style.
Princess Kaguya.
Princess Kaguya was an interesting blend. There were scenes that were very abstract, and there were scenes that were gorgeously detailed, and it was a weird mix. But one thing that was interesting, Kaguya took 6 or 7 years for him to make. He was going to release it with The Wind Rises, and I think it ended up coming out a year and a half later. And, this one, he talked in the interview about how he was disappointed that he didn't have more time to play around with style, that he was forced to not experiment as much as he wanted to. But in a sense, that might have been a good thing. He definitely experimented a lot with Only Yesterday and a lot with Kaguya. And one could say My Neighbors the Yamadas was a straight up visual experiment. But this one was still experimental, but in a far more muted way, which I think fits thematically very well with the film. But at any rate, we definitely need to cover Only Yesterday one of these days, and Pompoko and Kaguya and
actually, I want to say it's my favorite anime feature of all time. So I can definitely.
And at any rate, we've got, and then the music. The music has a little bit of an 80s vibe to it, which makes sense. It came out in the 80s, but it definitely has that 80s vibe to it. But other than that, I think it's fairly effective. What are y'all's thoughts on the music?
It could have had a 70s vibe.
Nice little funky groove to it.
Not much of a question for me, my friend. Not much for me, my friend. It's just something that puts in place to move the story along.
Actually, the ending theme was really good.
Yeah, it was nice. This was one, honestly, of Ghibli's films. This is, I think, one of their lesser musical efforts personally, but it's not bad by any means. It's pretty good. I mean, it's nowhere near the lofty heights of the sequel to Variety. That one, oh my God, the music was so great. But it's definitely not too far off the average, I think. I think there may have been a little too much 80s synth given the movie that we were looking at. Just a bit. But But anywho, I guess anyone have anything they really, really want to bring up in terms of production, in terms of what they know of the history or anything along those lines before we start talking about favorites?
I will end on just my well, I won't. I'll end on the favorites technically, but
right.
just the last of my. I just want to say is as much as I have put out, and I've tried to do my best to not sound like I hate this film or be 100% negative on it. Actually, matter of fact, I think most of my comments have been very positive in way I think that the film was executed. It's just again,
and I mean that in a good way.
yeah. It's again, it's not a. I do not consider this necessarily a bad film, but I do consider it a propaganda piece for the reasons I put up, and it does what it does very well. I feel the things that it wants me to feel in many ways. Regardless, every film has a manipulation value of a person's feelings. And when it comes to propaganda, it's even more important for that manipulation to be done correctly, because if you're not doing it correctly with that type of piece, you are not getting people to think the way that you want them to think in society.
Right.
Now, was that a full success? But it was definitely a partial success, and a lot of the other interpretations that followed as the film became international, though not probably what Takahata would have wanted necessarily, it still did a job that I think did a positive service for the world.
Very good. If nothing else, it taught us Westerners that anime could go in places that even that may be Watership Down, but otherwise no one else would go with animation.
It was a heck of a lot better than the other type of propaganda that I'd seen for World War II, which was the Sacred Sailors, which is that one's a frightening one. That is a frightening. If you have not seen it, you should see it. It's not anime, just so to speak, because it's not in the same style there, but it is an early Japanese animated film that, by God, it is creepy. And the levels that they go. Oh.
Lovely. How about the rest of you guys? Any other stuff before we move on to favorites?
Well, I've seen my fair share of Ghibli films. I kind of look at this film with the lens with the others, with the others. It's next to, it can argue what Whisper of the Heart, I think it's called. If you listen closely, is probably the one I don't like that. I like the least. It's something that I don't particularly, I didn't care for much when I did watch it. I did watch it because of all the accolades it had gotten. It's it's a remarkable piece. It has all these awards. At the time I didn't have much way of anime to talk about, so I said, why not, man? Let's give it a shot. And so, it is kind of, in a way, it's kind of like a start, kind of started to my thinking about what Studio Ghibli was, and probably one of the reasons why I didn't particularly, sing their praises too much until much later on in my anime career, when I started watching these films again with Nausicaa and the Castle in the Sky Laputa and the other ones. This one still remains to be pretty much my piece that I keep as a memory, and not so much of a piece to be seen. So I'm just exactly what Brandon told you all you guys at the beginning. There's some people that will watch this and say, "Well, that's it," and some people that would love to watch it over and over again. And I am one of those kind of people. I just didn't get much out of it, other than the feeling of dread and I got to watch this thing. And I would such films I would put on the shelf and try to watch something from it, then I'll try to watch something else, and pretty soon a week later it's still there. Yeah, but it's hard. It was hard for me to watch it.
Well, again, if you want to see a movie that you'll think afterward, I am glad I saw that, and I hope to God I never have to watch it again. Go to Pluto TV and watch Hunger Wars.
I don't need to see that one.
I'll take your advice on that one.
Oh, man.
I'll take your advice on that one.
But there are some like that. Like I went to the theater to see Black Swan, and I have not seen it since. And I own a copy. I intend to watch it again, but I really don't want to.
That scene where she peels the skin off of her arm.
Yes.
It just
Oh, God.
And Aronofsky's first film, Pie. Oh, it's there are films I have seen that I recognize their artistry, but I definitely feel that there are some you just don't want to see again. This one falls more into the category of I should wait a while between viewings, but I'm fine with that. I can see it every 3 or 4 years, and I'm fine with that. Some films, yes, there are some where it's like, and it's one of those things. I am surprised you didn't like Whisper of the Heart. That was I thought a delightful film,
but it really trudges on. It just trudges on. It's a lot of country roads, and
I
looking
love
at this
that.
piece, looking at a piece of rock and looking through it, a piece of crystal, and
Right.
trying to imagine yourself in another world. And ironically, was it The Return of the Cat, or was I think it was called? I really
Cat
like that
Returns,
piece.
yeah.
Yeah, I like that piece a lot better. So I said,
That
yeah,
was a lot more whimsical and
yeah.
more fantastical.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
in a way, I guess I could be thankful to the Whisper of the Heart, because it definitely
Right.
drove me into stupor,
Right.
thinking trying to get to the thing. So yeah,
It is a criminal shame. It is an absolute criminal shame that Whisper of the Heart was the only feature that Kondo was ever able to complete before he died. That was It's always unfortunate when you have a talented director like that just can't. Like Satoshi Kon only had 4 completed features.
yeah, that was a tragedy. Yeah, that was
Yeah,
certainly. I liked all his films. So
right.
yeah.
So anyway, let's go ahead. Now that we talked about how much we don't really want to see this again, let's talk favorites. And I guess I'm going to start to my right and go clockwise. How about you, Chris? What's your favorites in this one? Character, scene, interaction, what have you?
I was gonna say, yeah. Well, I mean, it's hard to pick a favorite. I guess I liked the overall film. I liked more the parts with the memory where he was remembering things and this sort of like, uh, the sentimental scenes I liked a lot. I also thought it was interesting that it seemed there seemed to be a theme with rain and water and tears that kind of added to that sort of layer with when we were talking about the coloring, adding to the sort of the mood of the movie, the whole theme with rain and water and the tears falling. And I thought that was an interesting. I like the whole the thing with the Fireflies, how it built up to that end of his sister being buried, and that whole thing. I thought that was an interesting way of doing things. Interesting the way the movie ended, and Sorry, I mean I can't really say one scene, but yeah, more the emotionally evoking scenes, I guess, the scenes that make you evoke strong emotions. I guess those, I know the
Right.
overall movie did, but the scenes that really go for that, those I would say would be favorites.
Okay. Okay. How about you, Roger?
Uh, Maybe I guess for me it's more of a planetary look at it. I guess I do like the background, artistic value of the show. Uh, I re- it's kind of hard for me to say I have a favorite part in this, because it kind of moves into the part where I think is really depressing. It's
Right.
very little for me to really enjoy it.
Mm.
I don't know
Well, you
if
can say like most impressive or what sticks in your mind or whatever.
well, the thing that sticks in my brain the most is the opening scene when the kid, the main character is already dead.
Right.
It's already dead. This is simply a narration.
Mm.
It's saying that,
Mm.
I'm sure I'm already dead, and this would happen. And of course, the opening scene is
September 21, 1945. That was the night I died. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
effective opening lines.
As that really took definitely if you're going to talk about a memorable scene, like you said, I would be saying that. Well, this one of the few shows where I could actually see that the main character has already died, and now you're just seeing what happened to that led to his death. So that's what I remember the most.
Yeah, kind of like another one of Brandon's favorite movies that we disagree on. But anyway, Dave, how about you?
I would have to mimic some of what Roger said, but I would also like to put forward the time in the Hobble where he really tried to make it seem like everything was okay. So like them just having the certain rituals of eating together and playing together and things of that nature, keeping her mind off of the problems that were really going on. Those scenes were pretty cool. Other than that, the fact that you get the whole story from a dead man, it's it is a depressing movie. So it is a masterpiece, but yet it's one that doesn't evoke you want to see it again, at least right away.
All right. How about you, Brandon?
Well, if I was to echo Stadler and Waldorf, I'd say my favorite scene, the credits. No, but I guess if I had to pick one that I looked at as the best, I preferred the opening, where you actually get to see the different colorations, the way they set up the scene, the way that they kind of gave you a heads up. Hey, this is gonna be a bumpy ride. So.
Right.
That's probably the best I could go with.
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night. Exactly. Yeah. I'm going to concur. That opening sequence was incredible. Those opening lines. That's a way to open a movie. And again, I love the way that they did this, what I call the spirit world scenes. I love how they were done in all reds and warm reddish tones, and it set it apart nicely from the rest of it. And it wasn't obtrusive either. It was kind of like, other than that opening scene, mostly they do it in passing. Like there's a little bit on the train or at the very end of the film. There's two moments in the film, that opening address and very briefly at the end, where Sato looks directly at the camera to address the audience. And so that's kind of a nice little circular thing they did there. And I will again mention that the scene in the doctor's office, I just found that very effective. Where are we going to get food? That little bit of desperation. And I have to mention, because I somehow haven't yet, this is called Grave of the Fireflies, Hotaru no Haka, and yet we barely talked about the Fireflies. There is that lovely scene where they're catching the Fireflies and making this sort of starry night in their shelter. Of course, as a tragic postscript, which we could have done without, but where you have the literal Grave of the Fireflies in that Setsuko builds. But just that scene, the beauty of that scene where they're catching and enjoying the light from the flies, I just thought that was a lovely, or Beatles rather, but I thought it was a lovely scene. And I should mention, because I haven't, that this is the film that taught me the words Hotaru and Haka. I learned a few other bits and pieces here and there, but definitely Hotaru is I think a lovely word, and I can credit this film for that directly. But other than that, I think that about does, or doesn't it? Anyone else have any final thoughts? Or
is that your final answer?
Is that your final answer? Yes? No? Okay. I guess, are we going to hold outros for the second one?
Yep.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
pretty cool.
Well, all right then, folks. I'm glad you joined us for this bumpy ride. And this is definitely a film, like, whether you... I do think this is a film that probably should be seen. I mean, I would agree with the people that put it out in the first place. I've said for years I would think this should be required viewing in high school. They're just throwing it out there. But definitely be prepared if you have not seen it yet. Be ready to watch something light and frothy afterwards.
Yeah, it's definitely for kids.
Yes.
Yeah, no, for kids.
Exactly. All right. So I guess we should say good night, everybody, and join us on the other channel for the disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya.
All right.
Good night.
Yep.
Good night.